Thanks so much to KXLG for inviting us to be on their radio show.
We always appreciate the opportunity to share our purpose behind the walk, and they were kind enough to lend us their platform to do so.
Maybe explain a little bit about, I think it'll probably lead into your mission, but maybe a little background of you guys.
We're walking 12,000 miles between all 50 states. We're dividing the states into segments so that we're north for the summer and south for the winter. We have just completed segment 4, and we've done 23 states, and we just broke 5,000 miles before the end of our segment, which was our goalpost that we were shooting for. And it didn't start out as a mission to walk to each of the 50 states. We originally just wanted to see if we could walk from our home state, Missouri, to the mountains of Colorado during the summer across Kansas. We were trying to subject ourselves to the kind of hardship that would develop some resiliency and also allow us to get to know the world in a different way, learn more about ourselves and learn more about this space that we inhabit. But the shape of the journey has changed quite a lot over time.
I see, like, some of the things that you talk about, are they environmental? I know, like, well, one of the most recent ones was just a bunch of trash sitting on the side of in a ditch, but is that kind of an overall focus for you too? Is some of that as you're traveling and you notice?
Not so specifically that, although the message we're sharing is very holistic. We're trying to primarily talk to people about our minds and how malleable we are, how much we can train our minds to be more content and more loving, and that envelops a lot of things. Like littering clearly is not the most loving act, so that is a part of it, but it's not, I wouldn't make that a main point necessarily.
I think I know the post that you're referring to, and it was really more pointing to the fact that we're very quick to demonize people for doing things that maybe aren't necessarily good for the environment. In no way do we support littering, but we often write people off for the bad habits that they have, and yet we're all guilty of something. So that post in particular pertains to our demonization of one another for the things that we might not necessarily do ourselves, but we're all kind of at fault for something, and we should turn our blind eye inwards so that we take a look in the mirror before condemning others. We had found a bunch of litter on the side of the road, and so Paige and I, our initial reaction that we're most inclined toward is, what a terrible person. How could they do that? That's such an awful thing to do. But we got to thinking about it, and I almost guarantee that somebody who has littered or does litter has put us up for the night. They've bought us a meal, or they've given us a donation, or they've helped us along our journey in some way, doing their best to pay it forward. But what we're trying to do, we're not only talking to people about ways that they can train their minds to be more resilient, like the journey started out for us, but we're trying to talk to people about the way that they look at each other and the different ways that they have for perceiving the people around them, and the way that they perceive themselves, how that can or should play a role in the way that they're looking at others. In this case, we're all guilty of something, right? Whether it's the food that we eat, we're not like eating ethically, or we're not exactly being efficient with our fuel, and we just drive wherever we want to, whenever we want to. We're all guilty for something, even if it's not so specific as littering.
That is a very in-depth look at that. I really appreciate that. Thank you for that answer. Have you encountered any negativity on the road, or anything that has, frightened you or made you reconsider doing this?
The main thing that happens to us is facing the negativity in traffic, whether it's people not being considerate, not giving a safe amount of space, or people just looking judgmental or angry behind the field. But overall, the large majority of interactions have been very positive, very kind, and supportive. The world is not nearly as dangerous as we originally thought, or as many people think. One of the number one questions we get is, have you been afraid or threatened or anything like that? And we haven't, and we've walked for over 600 days now. The world is largely good. People are at least trying to do good. And when someone is inconsiderate or rude behind their windshield, we've talked about it many times. We've not had people be that rude to our faces, and I think it's the veil of anonymity that makes people act differently, when the same person might be kind to us in person.
Yeah, I think Paige hits on an important point there. That sort of behavior is present, whether it's behind the veil of anonymity that being in a vehicle provides you, or whether it's behind the screen on social media. We act and react differently when we don't have to be held accountable there in that moment by the reaction of that other person. Something that we'd certainly like to draw people's attention to, because it's a very social expedition, this thing that we're on. We're talking to people about just generally the way that we interact with each other, the way that we think about each other, and the ways that we can shape the way that we think about each other to change our interactions between one another.
Okay, so you guys are from Missouri, right?
Yes.
Okay. What's one of the... I mean, it's been a lot of days and a lot of miles, but have you... I see a lot of some blogging and things like that. Are there some top 10 or some favorite encounters or moments that you've come across so far?
Yeah, I think one that we often point to, just because it changed our idea of the potential that people have for the way that they communicate and the way that society's formed, was our time we spent with the Mennonites. We got passed on between about 4 different Mennonite families up in Wisconsin, and there were a few things that really stood out to me. One was their attention span when it came to conversating. They would fully realize a conversational topic, right? Like maybe it took an hour, but they would stay on that until they felt that it had been fully explored. Whereas normally in contemporary society, there's a lot of topic jumping, very haphazard, and people are bouncing around. I did this today. Well, I did that today, and this other thing happened, and it's very unfulfilling at times. It feels like this egocentric trade of each other's experiences within that week. But the Mennonites bite down into something, whether it's the concern of another person or it's their own concern. They still have the ability to talk about it very in depth and
discover the full meaning behind it all.
Yeah. They also have different sorts of interactions, like within the family. We sat down at this big elongated family dinner table. They had like 8 children, I think, for one of the families that hosted us. Another one had something like that, 8 or 9. The kids all are passing the food around, and nobody's talking over one another, and everyone's waiting their turn. You don't see that, right? We spend a lot of time with families. Most people are a family, so we get hosted by more families than we get hosted by single people, and none run like the well-oiled machine that the Mennonites families are.
And even more impressively, it's not just that they weren't talking over each other, but the kids did not seem like they were not discontent to be so well behaved. A lot of children, if they're resentfully doing what their parents want them to, are clearly not having the best time, but they were such a happy, content group of people.
I think part of that was because the children were just as much a part of the conversation if they would want to make themselves. They just had to wait their turn like everybody else. That everyone kind of had like the same opportunity to talk at the dinner table, regardless of whether they were 5 years old or 19 years old or the dad, but they waited until the other people were done speaking.
Does an interaction make you reconsider how you interact with family? Or, I don't know if you have children, if you were going to have children, does any of that, do you think, weigh in on how you might interact in the future?
They're definitely a good example of how we can exercise our attention span and openness to fully hear each other out. Often when we're talking to someone, we're thinking about what we're going to say next rather than being fully present and hearing what they have to say and being there for them first before you're worried about how you're going to sound and what am I going to say next. I don't want to sound stupid, and what do they want to hear out of me? We don't need to overly focus on those things. I think interaction comes out more genuinely and more peacefully and at a healthy pace whenever you're focused on being there for the moment for the other person.
And another contributing factor to that is that the Mennonites don't have smartphones or TVs. It's kind of telling the way that our attention spans have shortened because of some of the entertainment and media influences that we have on us. It's literally changing the shape of our brain, right? Neuroplasticity is one of the things that Paige and I have talked about on several different occasions through our essays and posts. The things that we give our attention to literally change us neurologically, like they physically change us. Our brain is rewired to best suit its environment, and when we're stimulating ourselves very rapidly, it creates a mind that is more capable but also more inclined to short bursts of attentional focus. And the Mennonites have the ability to hold their attention in one place for a longer period of time before feeling like they need to reach out for some other kind of stimulation.
Well, let's touch a little on mental health, maybe. If you have you to yourself dealt with a lower mental health or depression, and now that you've done this, have you seen things within your travels that bring a sense of positive mental health that maybe we're losing touch with in the modern society?
I wouldn't say either of us would probably classify ourselves as being like clinically depressed or anxious or anything like that, but we've definitely, I don't think we often hold a state of perfect mental health. I think we're always oscillating, all of us. And
yeah, I think like when the thing that really kicked my quest for contentment off was my entire adult life. I had worked for up until the age of 24. From the time I was 16, I worked for corporations, and I did the standard things that we do in the modern era with myself. I entertained myself with Netflix and video games, and I worked at a desk in front of a screen all day. And I was pretty cynical because I was plugged into certain negative filter bubbles and my own kind of echo chamber because I wasn't exposing myself to every side that's out there. There are things that we fixate over, right? Or fixate on. We ruminate about the past and we perseverate on the future, and we're just not often living in the here and now. We become kind of, and I mean this colloquially because it's not an actual like psychological designation, but we become neurotic over time. We just obsessive over these little things that don't matter in the grand scheme of things, and a lot of our mental energy is spent suffering over them. The thing that we've come to appreciate about doing something like the walk, although I would say the shape of it's a little bit different now that we have all the social media that we do, is that subjecting yourself to that kind of physical hardship, even though it's hardship, it forces you into a position where your concerns are more real, and there are fewer of them, right? You're concerned about making to the place you need to go, sleeping somewhere, finding water, and feeding yourself. And if our concerns are focused on other things, little policies, right? Like if you work for a corporation, you're worried about all of these different little policies and rules that you're obligated to adhere to. Those stack. They can kind of stack exponentially until you're made more miserable than you are when you're actually in a survival situation. Our stresses don't accumulate relative to their severity, to their real world severity. They just kind of accumulate exponentially. And the walk has helped us break away from that and kind of see the other side of things. As social media becomes more a feature of the walk, the more we're pulled out of the present and the here and now because we're worried about talking to such a large group of people and the algorithm, those little policies and artificial concerns that pull us out of the present. That's the thing that's been really revealing. It's this opportunity to jump into the deep end of like what your mind can look like if you're only doing all the things that you should for yourself, right? You're exercising every single day, you're eating pretty well, you're getting to know every side of an argument and talking to all sorts of different people. And then we can even come home, step back into our old shoes and come back to feeling what it was like to not be walking all the time.
So you've been doing this for over 600 days, is that right?
yes, our last day walking into Watertown was day 629.
Oh, very cool. Did you kind of purge your life a little as far as some of your, bills, debt, things like that? So when you go out, you're kind of free. You still have a home, though. You said when you come back and things like that, or how does that kind of look for you?
Neither of us had debt when we met. Thankfully, we have family as a home base, but we don't have our own property or any debt to worry about.
I like in your phrasing, you've got raising awareness about the power of the mind and delivering tools and content to help retrain a healthier thought pattern. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about, I know everyone's got their own, like we've said, their own kind of problems, but what does that kind of mean to you when you give people advice like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're looking more specifically like what are the tools that we can use to retrain healthier thought patterns? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, kind of like are there things people come to you with that you're like, yeah, this is why we're doing this because we come across this often, or something like that maybe?
I think oftentimes we're drug along by the thoughts which form inside of our head. That inner monologue, it pulls us around and we identify with it, and we consider ourselves to be that thing. But if you pay close attention, your thoughts arise spontaneously. They just populate out of the ether, essentially. And you can observe them objectively and determine what you do or don't want to do with those thoughts if you practice that kind of introspective awareness. I mean, I could be more specific and say that it's mindfulness. It's meditation. That's really at the root of many of the tools that we would like people to implement, because there are different tools that you can implement. Cognitive psychology has an absolutely lovely tool known as cognitive reframing, which is really just the way that you shape that story that's occurring within your inner monologue. But you have to have enough self-awareness to figure out when you need to do that, if now's a good time to do that, and how can you do that. And you can't do that unless you can really observe your thoughts. So that kind of meditative mindfulness, where you work to observe your thoughts rather than get drug along by them, is really the start to a lot of great things. But from there, your options and tools that you have available to yourself are exponential. Cognitive reframing is one, but if you're also paying close attention, you'll start to notice that the things that you subject yourself to experientially are changing which thoughts manifest and what kind of a person you're becoming. So the walk is a really great means of us doing that for ourselves. It subjects us to uncertainty and hardship that we're forced into overcoming. And by virtue of the fact that we're overcoming these great difficulties and hardships on the walk, other hardship and adversity looks smaller in comparison. And that's one means of cognitively reframing things, is because you subject yourself to something that makes the other stuff that you've been ruminating about or perseverating on seem more insignificant. It pales in comparison. 90 degrees doesn't seem so bad if you've walked through 105 degrees. The walk provides lots of opportunities for that, whether it's the difficulty of things environmental or it's the conversations that we're having with other people. Like if you're in a conversation with someone and you don't necessarily mesh well with them, you'll typically find yourself saying, this person's annoying. But you could instead say to yourself, wow, I'm easily annoyed. Maybe I should work on that. But it does require that self-awareness to turn your attention back on yourself.
Do you have any college experience, or what kind of got you into, you guys into the maybe mindfulness, some of that? I know they talk about with self-help books and things, but where did you kind of come across some of that?
For me, it's been my interest in philosophy. I, more than anything, started out with an interest in, it's the entry point for a lot of people here in the West, the existentialist philosophers like Albert Camus, Kierkegaard, and Nietzsche, and probably just list off a bunch of names that nobody, but they were the entry point, and yet they can lead you into this great despair where you just feel like you have no intrinsic meaning to your life and nothing's worth any effort and people are terrible. But I eventually stumbled into the philosophy of mind and different philosophies of mind over time, such as stoicism, which now has been hijacked by pop culture into broicism, and we hope to shy away from that as much as we can. But the Stoics really present certain things that are incredibly helpful to psychological well-being. Probably the very first thing that I heard was like a self-evident truth that I think is really important for us to be wearing on our sleeves rather than just kind of knowing that it's the case. It's known as the dichotomy of control, and Epictetus wrote about this in the Enchiridion. He basically says that there are those things which are within your control, and there are those things which are outside of your control. Outside of your control it's everything external. It's people's opinions, where you're born, the family that you have. It can be your health at times that can escape you. Sometimes materially you don't have that within your control. But inside of your control are everything that occurs internally, right? Your perception, opinion, emotion, your inner monologue. But if you desire that the things which are outside of your control should be within your control, then you're forever going to be a slave to your mind. Instead, we should work on giving our attention to the things which are within our control and letting go of the things outside of your control. That was probably the entry point for me. That just blew open my mind and set me down this path of, well, what else mental tools could I use?
Like every married couple, you guys do still get into squabbles, I would imagine, though, right? Being on the road all the time?
That's funny you mention it. We just made a post about this just a handful of days ago.
Oh. So you still argue a bit?
Oh, a little bit, yeah.
Have you found maybe in the years, the time that you have been together, that some of that has changed for you, though? How you might approach a situation, or maybe even especially since the walk, you've met different families, marriages, so on. Has some of that changed for you guys, do you think?
Yeah, we've definitely grown through the walk, and we are actually dating when we first started walking, and after the first 6-month segment, we went home and got married. And the walk, it puts you in a position where you have to learn how to communicate and talk through things. We are together 100% of the time when we're on the walk, so we've learned how to talk through things much better than before. I think we've grown together by going through much hardship together. When you have to learn how to go through uncomfortable circumstances and not get frustrated with each other, it really helps you strengthen your relationship, to not take out the frustration and anger on each other, but to try and be supportive to each other through it.
I think it really bolsters a trust in your partner because you're both positioning yourselves in like the most trying and difficult circumstances. You don't have to have the suspicion of, does my partner have my best interest at heart, or are they trying to drag me down in some way, or are they pointing the finger at me when it's really their fault? Like, you get to learn all of those questions, the answers to all those questions really, really quickly. The walk's very revealing for the kind of person that you're with. It can take a long time for a relationship to be subjected to some serious hardship if you're just living a normal life. And so you don't really know what you're working with as far as your partner goes for quite some time.
To see them at their worst.
Yeah, to see them at their worst. On the walk, we probably see each other at our worst like once every couple of weeks. Very high and the lows are very low. We experience lots of incredible amounts of kindness on the road, and every day hurts. It's like you're dodging traffic and you're looking for places to sleep, and it's as difficult as it is fulfilling.
Fulfilling.
Yeah.
It's kind of the best kind of fulfilling sometimes.
I would say so.
What is one of the most challenging things that you have come across as a couple on your journey?
I still go back to the mosquito plague that we went through in Wisconsin. I don't have another word to describe it. It's just, if you scroll back deep enough into our Facebook, you'll see this picture of my shirtless back, and it practically looks like I have leprosy. That mosquito bites occurred within about 2 hours of wearing a long sleeve shirt, and they were relentless for probably the next week after that. We were walking through the Northwoods, and there were so many mosquitoes that you had to raise your voice to hear each other because the hum of the mosquitoes was so loud. You would breathe them in if you weren't wearing a head net, but we were wearing like full mosquito netting the whole time.
And a leather jacket and a rain suit and gloves.
During the summer, because they would bite you through anything else.
Yeah.
They'll bite you through all your clothing. They'll get you through the mosquito netting if it presses up against your skin.
Yeah.
If it's like touching your skin, they would get you there.
Oh.
I had this like between where my collar of my leather jacket was and where the bottom of my mosquito head net came down, there was about a half of an inch of space that was just skin that I couldn't get fully covered. And they bit that same area so many times that it was like one giant mosquito band bite. They kept rebiting and bite, and it hurt like into the bone. I've never been in such pain from mosquito bites, but
I had the same thing by my gloves.
yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the hardest few days to get through when they're at their worst.
Everybody up there said that they hadn't seen anything like it. They said this is their mosquito season, but we've never seen it like this before. The dragonflies, we heard, the dragonflies were late to hatching, and it was quite correlated that when after the dragonflies had come out, it was probably only another few days before the mosquitoes started disappearing, and the dragonflies came out in masses, which was pretty spectacular. We were go dragonflies.
I'll maybe wrap up with this. If you have to tell us, of course, what you thought of South Dakota, and tell us about your visit to South Dakota and our little town of Watertown.
South Dakota was really good. I mean, it's going to be up there among the friendlier states.
I think we were hosted just about every night in South Dakota. We got to stay inside a home.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we stayed in a home almost every night, which is a good thing because there's not a lot of there aren't many places forest to camp out there.
Yeah. Not even trees to hide in. So.
But yeah, South Dakota was definitely exceptionally friendly. We had a really good time while we were there. Don't like the wind. Still don't like the wind.
That was the main obstacle. Otherwise, it was a really great walk through South Dakota. Made some good friends there. And Watertown. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, Watertown had a good welcome for it. Labby's, the sports bar there, they fed us, and Dad had come to grab us up, and they not only fed us, but they fed Dad too. I was like, you're feeding Dad? And they're like, well, he came down here to grab you guys. He's as much a part of this journey. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So he drove up here from Missouri then, or?
Yeah, it was the end of our, and so he brought our car back to us, and we drove back. Our shirts say, change the inside, change the outside. A lot of people want to improve the world through external means, seeking control over the environment that surrounds them. But we're pointing people in the direction of changing themselves internally. If you imagine a world in which it was much more culturally pushed for us to work inwardly rather than to work outwardly, the world would naturally drift in a more positive direction if everyone was just working on becoming their best selves and becoming more selfless and more open-minded and more understanding and empathetic. The world would become, I think, what many of us hope to see it become. But because we don't really go through life exploring the landscape of mind and learning about the way that we work internally, we're not even capable of changing the world externally in a way that will positively benefit it, because we're not the most rational creatures. We're often dragged along by our emotions and our egocentric desires, and we would really just like to push people toward changing themselves. I think we've undersold it here in the West, what we're capable of becoming, but we can become dramatically different people. And subjecting yourself to extreme conditions or circumstances can be one of the most revealing things to accomplish that kind of change of mind. That's what the walk has been for us. It's made me far less cynical, much more understanding, far less closed off. And for Paige, it's given her a great amount of confidence, and she's learned to talk to people in a different way than ever before.
Earlier, when you asked what the most challenging things have been for us, I would put that up there as being one of my top, is learning how to socialize in general, but especially with such a variety of people, and not just learn to get along, but to make friends with them and learn to empathize with people who are just complete opposite of you.